Hmm. Should this go here or here or... Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. I was just trying to think of my next move in the popular strategical game called chess. But did you know that in 600 AD, this bishop was known as an elephant? Let's talk more about the ancient history and more of the popular game chess. So the oldest board game, which is still widely popular today, starts off with two sort of teams, the white and the black, or whatever colors the chess is commonly known in. It also has 6 pieces, which we'll all get into later. And this piece right here, the king, which we will also talk about, the objective of winning chess is to get the king into a standstill, which is pretty much a checkmate, and that's how you know you won the game. So now we're going to be talking about the pieces of chess. We're going to start off with the king here, and the king can move in any direction, but only one space. The rook can move up, down, left or right, any amount of spaces. The bishop can move only diagonally, any amount of spaces. The queen can move in any direction, any amount of spaces. The horse over here, my favorite, can move in any sort of L pattern. So for instance, it can go from this square to this one. If it's starting right here, it can go from here to here. And then the pawn is where it gets a little bit confusing. This pawn right here, if it's not in its starting move, it can only move one position forward. If you are just starting off a game, you can move 2 spaces forward. But for instance, this is where it gets confusing as it's capturing mechanic. Pawns can capture diagonally. So those are all the pieces of chess. This is how you set up a chessboard. It was with the ancient Persians who would create the first game of chess that would spread to Europe that would develop into the game we know as of today. Back in those times, the game was called Shadowraj. Around 650 AD, the game of Shadowraj reached out to Arab kingdoms, the Byzantine court, Greece, Mecca, and Medina. It's unclear how Shadowraj arrived in Europe, being surrounded by stories of how it arrived. One story goes it was brought into Spain when they settled in Andalusia. Another is the Knights of the Cross obtained the games from Arab lands during the Crusades. Regardless, the game would be brought to Europe and go through the changes that would create the game of chess we know today. The pieces of Shadowraj are very different from modern-day chess pieces, including how they looked. It still had a king, or Sa, as they would call it, and still moved just like a king we know in chess. A piece called Prime Minister, or Furs, could move 1 square diagonally only. The elephant, or Fill, being the original bishop, moved 2 squares diagonally only, but could jump over intervening pieces. The warhorse, or Faras, moved like a knight, and the rook moved just like a rook. The game also had pawns, but if a pawn reached the far side of the board, it would be promoted to a prime minister. Pawns also can move only 1 space, even on their first turn. Some of the pieces also went by different names. We will mention some of these alternating names when we're explaining the rules of Shadowraj. Rules for this game were set up into 13 steps, or rules, that both players have to follow when playing the game. First, Shadowraj is played on a board of 8 by 8 squares. A fun fact about the board is that there are no white or black squares. It was all one color. Second, the game was played by 2 players, with one player known as white and the other known as black. This is something that chess also has. Third, each player has 16 pieces in the respective color they are playing. 1 king, 1 prime minister, or also called a vizier, 2 elephants, 2 horses, 2 rooks, or even sometimes called chariots. and 8 pawns. Each piece is placed in particular spots, just like chess. Fourth, white makes the first turn and then goes black. These turns keep going until the game is over. Fifth, a turn consists of moving a piece and removing or capturing the opponent's piece. 6. Each piece has rules to follow. The king may move to any of the 8 squares adjacent to him. The vizier may move to any of the 4 adjacent diagonal squares. The elephant may move exactly 2 squares in a diagonal direction, jumping over any piece that occupies the intervening square. The horse moves 1 square horizontally or vertically, then 1 square diagonally away from its starting point, jumping over any piece that occupies the intervening square. The chariot moves any distance horizontally or vertically, but may not jump over intervening pieces, which blocks its way. The pawn moves 1 square forward unless it wishes to capture, in which case it moves 1 square diagonally forwards. 7th is the rule of the king if threatened with capture. Just like in regular chess, the king moves to a safe square, another piece must move to protect him, or the opponent's piece must be captured. 8. A king may never move into a square that threatens it by an opponent's piece. Same goes for pieces that can expose the king. 9th, if a pawn reaches the other side of the board, it is promoted into the prime minister, also called a vizier. The next few are the conditions of how to win and a draw can occur in the game, so we will combine everything together for this. Win conditions are to capture the opponent's king if he or she has 2 or more pieces left, but the opponent has only a king, and if the opponent has no legal move, a draw happens if both players only have their kings left on the board. Overall, this game is just like modern day chess. As the game traveled the world, its name and how it would be played would also change. Another change would be how the pieces looked. The Chinese created xiangqi or xiangqi. Japanese had shogi. The Burmese had situyin. Korean had Changi, and Thailand had Makruk. All different games were different rules, pieces, and different names to the game, but they all came from Shadowraj. We could go on a long time of how all these different chess games were played, but it would take a long time going over the rules and even the pieces. Instead, how about we look a little into a game called 4-player Shadowranga? If you couldn't guess it, this was 4-player chess. Why is it called Shangaranga though? Well, the first actual chess game was made in India in the 6th century, but it was Shadowraj that would create the modern world of chess. This game was Shadowranga and had a 4-player variant. 4-player Shadowranga has less pieces for the game, and for good reason. Despite this, the pieces still function like a chess game's pieces would. We have 4 pawns that move just like modern pawns, boatmen which can move only 2 squares diagonally, but could jump over intervening pieces, cavalry that moves just like modern knights, the elephant which moved just like a rook, and the Raja which was the king. In a way, this was simple handful of pieces for the game. The reason why it has less pieces to the other chess games was they have the ability to fit all 4 players on one board. Even though Shadowranga was an interesting sort of board game, did have some very complex rules such as losing a king twice or rolling the dice to make your move. Also, another big part of Shadowranga was it had 2v2, so if your teammate wasn't doing good, then you would be falling behind. Also, you would have more pieces to work with, so if you and your team had a really good connection, you'd be able to use your smarts to win the game of Shadowranga. And even though Shadowranga was not the introducer of chess, it still would have been an amazing and interesting variant of the game known as chess today. Let's look back at the game of modern chess. It was made around the end of the 15th century in Europe and became popular fast. Just like the other games, chess would have different rules and pieces changed. The queen would have been added into chess, which replaced the prime minister or vizier. It is would be known as the most powerful piece. The bishop was also added into the game, replacing the elephant. Until the mid-19th century, the rich or people of nobility would have very ornate, expensive decoration pieces representing the kings, queens, and even religious figures. This would make the pieces top heavy, of course. It was proof chess was the game for the higher class, while the common folk had wooden pieces to play with. As a fun fact about chess, it was banned by kings and religious leaders. King Louis IX was such a king, but the game's popularity helped by its own social status. A chess set was often associated with wealth, knowledge, and power. The game was a favorite of King Henry I, Henry II, John, and Richard I of England. It wouldn't be a big surprise if the king piece in their chess set were themselves or even another piece they admired. It wasn't just the people of Europe who had fancy design pieces for chess. The design of pieces have grown in style and details through the travel it has made before having the modern look we commonly know. What is the most interesting design in the piece from the Scandinavians? At first glance, some might think these pieces were for some other game, but they are for chess. Many of the pieces date back to the 12th century. For many, the pieces would be called the Lewis chess pieces, based on discovery of the island of Lewis. These detailed pieces were made from walrus ivory and sperm whale teeth. As a fun fact, one walrus tusk could make up to 4 chess pieces. These pieces can also be found in the game of Taffle, a game that needs a king and pawns with the king surrounded by the pawns, are also called guards. If you were to take a guess, Taffle, or sometimes called Taffle, is a game like chess. The game was played by Vikings, and at first look, almost looked like 4-player Shadowranga, but it is played by 2 players. Players are known as the attackers, and the other being the defenders. Attacker's goal is simple: capture the king, while the defender's goal is very different. The defender's goal to win is to get the king to a space called a refuge square, which are located at the corners of the board. The boards are 11 by 11 squares. Pieces are pretty simple. Attackers get through groups of 6 pieces at each side of the board, while the defenders get a king and 12 other pieces. The king is placed in the middle, and the other 12 pieces are arranged around the king. So as we can see, this is what a modern Taffle board looks like. It's 11 by 11 squares. This is the king's middle. These are where the guards sit. These 4 spots in the corners are refuge spots. And then these on the outskirts are the attackers. Now I'm going to show you what the pieces look like really quick. Here's the king, and the king goes right in the middle. We're not going to set the entire board today, but we're just going to do some of it. This is the guards of the king. So these go all around the guard points as such. And then these right here are the attackers. And these go on the spots on the outskirts. And we may look into this game more in the future. We should look back at Shadowranga so we know how it was played, since in a way, it's the grandfather to chess. First off, we can state what Shadowranga means, which is 4 limbs or 4 parts. This is because of the 4 divisions of the army used in ancient India, which were the infantry, chariots, cavalry, and elephants. Care to take a guess what the pieces of this game will have? The game pieces for Shadowranga are the infantry, chariots, cavalry, and elephants. But you also have the Raja or king and his vizier. Overall, the game is the same as Shadowrang, but the board is marked in some squares. Oddly enough, these marks do nothing in the game. They are not some sort of safe space, special movement rules, or even a place to start pieces. It's possible that these marks are meant to show the middle and corners of the board. Sometimes we will see these same marks in a digital version of chess. Perhaps this was something chess has taken for players to learn where the middle was on the board. Other than that, Shadowranga is not much different than Shadowraj. It's possible that people tend to forget about Shadowranga and know more about its 4-player variant, hence why it is overlooked to being the original chess. So for Shadowraj, you can play on this board with these pieces, But all you have to do is change the rules of the pieces and the rules of the game. One great example is the bishop, which is the elephant in Shadowraj. You would have to move it diagonally, but only 2 spaces, while in the game of chess, you can move it diagonally by any amount of spaces. Don't worry if you don't get the game of Shadowraj, it's complicated. So there you have the ancient history of chess. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you all have a good day, and I'll see you next time.